Jack Callahan was a man who seemed to have the world figured out. His name was known far and wide across the deserts of the American West, whispered with both fear and awe. Once a humble farm boy, Jack had chosen a different path in life, a path that led him into a world of crime and lawlessness. He was an outlaw, a man without a clear allegiance, wandering from town to town, always looking over his shoulder, running from the law or whatever trouble he had stirred up. He was quick with his gun and had a sharp mind that allowed him to survive in a world where danger lurked around every corner. For years, Jack had lived a life of theft and escape, robbing trains, holding up banks, and outsmarting the law at every turn. He had no family, no friends, and no home. His companions were the cold desert winds, the echoes of his past mistakes, and his own restless soul. Jack was a man who had seen the worst the world had to offer, and in turn, he had become hardened, almost unfeeling. Trust was a foreign concept to him, and love was a luxury he couldn't afford. But even an outlaw like Jack couldn't outrun his past forever. One fateful day, everything changed. Jack had just pulled off another heist in a small, dusty town in the middle of nowhere. The plan had gone smoothly, as it usually did, with Jack and his gang making off with a small fortune, but something had gone wrong that day. Perhaps it was the heat, or the bad luck that seemed to follow him, but the robbery had been messy, more chaotic than usual. Shots were fired, and before Jack knew it, the law was on his tail. A posse of bounty hunters had picked up his trail, and they were closing in fast. Jack was no stranger to being hunted. He had evaded capture more times than he could count. But this time, something was different. The bounty hunters were relentless, and the landscape was unforgiving. Jack, tired from years of running, made a decision to take a different route, to hide instead of keep running. He knew he couldn't outrun them forever, so he fled deeper into the wilderness, hoping to find shelter and a moment of peace. His luck, as usual, ran out. Jack was shot in the leg while trying to outrun the bounty hunters. The wound wasn't fatal, but it was enough to slow him down. Bleeding and exhausted, Jack stumbled through the harsh desert landscape, his vision blurry, and his body growing weaker with each step. He needed help. He had no choice but to keep moving, though he had no idea where he was going. His mind was clouded with pain and desperation. As he wandered aimlessly, Jack stumbled upon a small, hidden creek. The sight of fresh water was a relief, but he could barely gather the strength to drink. His head was spinning, and he collapsed by the water's edge, unable to move. He was certain that death would find him soon. He could feel it in his bones. Just as he was about to surrender to the darkness creeping in around him, he heard a rustling sound behind him. His instincts kicked in, and he grabbed for his gun, though his hands were weak and shaky. To his surprise, it wasn't a bounty hunter or a wild animal that emerged from the trees. It was a woman, an Apache woman. She was tall and strong, with dark, intelligent eyes that seemed to see straight through him. Her long black hair flowed behind her like a dark river as she approached, her movements calm and deliberate. Jack didn't know if he could trust her, but his body was too weak to fight. He lowered his gun, his eyes flickering with confusion and curiosity. The Apache woman didn't speak at first. She simply knelt beside him, her hands gently checking his wound. Jack flinched at the touch, but she was skilled, and the pain subsided as she worked. She spoke to him in her native language, her voice soft yet firm. But Jack couldn't understand a word. She didn't seem to be afraid of him, though, which was a surprise. Jack had become used to people running from him, even the lawmen who chased him. But this woman showed no fear. She simply continued to care for his wound with a calm efficiency that struck him as strange. After what felt like an eternity, the woman managed to stop the bleeding and wrap his leg. She stood up, looking down at him with an expression that Jack couldn't quite read. Then she spoke again, this time in broken English. "You are hurt," she said, her voice low and steady. "You will die if you stay here." Jack, still in pain and weak from the blood loss, didn't have the energy to argue. He nodded, unsure of what else to say. The Apache woman didn't wait for a response. She turned and motioned for him to follow her. Jack was hesitant at first. He didn't trust easily, but there was something about her that made him believe she wasn't leading him into a trap. He struggled to his feet, leaning heavily on his good leg, and followed her as best as he could. She led him through the dense underbrush, moving with a grace that seemed unnatural. For hours, they traveled deeper into the wilderness, and Jack couldn't help but wonder who this woman was. What did she want with him? And why hadn't she just left him to die out there in the desert? As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the landscape, they arrived at a hidden Apache camp, nestled in the valley between two rugged hills. The camp was quiet, but there was an air of strength and serenity to it. Jack could see several other Apache people going about their business, working on various tasks. It was clear that this was a close-knit community, one that had survived the hardships of the desert for generations. The Apache woman led Jack to a small hut made of wooden poles and animal hides. She helped him inside, where he was laid down on a bed of furs. The warmth of the fire crackling in the center of the hut soothed his aching body. The woman went to a nearby table and began preparing something, perhaps medicine or herbs, to treat his injury further. Jack lay there, his mind spinning with questions. He had been saved, but by whom, and why? He had lived a life of violence, but this woman had shown him nothing but kindness. What was her story? What had brought her to this place? And most importantly, what would happen to him now? As he watched her work, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that this was a turning point in his life. For the first time in a long while, he felt a flicker of hope, a small, fragile thing, but it was there. Maybe this woman, and the Apache people, could offer him something he had long abandoned. A chance at redemption. But little did Jack know, this chance would come with a price. A price that would test his very soul and change the course of his destiny forever. The Apache woman's name was Ayasha, and she was unlike anyone Jack had ever met. In the days that followed, as his leg healed under her careful attention, Jack learned more about her and the life she led. She was the daughter of the chief of a strong Apache tribe that had lived in these rugged mountains for generations. Her people were known for their fierce independence, their deep connection to the land, and their ability to survive in the harshest of conditions. But Ayasha was more than just the daughter of a chief. She was a warrior in her own right. Her sharp eyes and steady hands were evidence of the skills she had developed since childhood, skills that made her as capable with a bow and arrow as she was with her words. While Jack's body slowly mended, his mind remained restless. He was in a foreign world now, a world completely different from the one he had known. The desert was a harsh and unforgiving place, but this wilderness, this place where the Apache lived, was something altogether more alive. It was a place of quiet strength, where every tree, every rock, and every breath of wind seemed to have meaning. Jack could sense it in the air, a pulse of life that was both comforting and intimidating. He had spent so many years running from one danger to the next, living in chaos, that the stillness of this place felt foreign to him. Ayasha spent her days tending to the village, helping her people with their daily tasks. She moved with grace and purpose, always calm and focused. Jack watched her closely, fascinated by the way she moved through the world. Her people seemed to have an unspoken understanding with her, a deep respect that came from years of shared history. Jack, however, was an outsider, and he knew it. He wasn't sure why Ayasha had chosen to help him, but he felt a deep gratitude toward her. His life, once filled with nothing but violence and betrayal, was now at a crossroads. He had been given a second chance, but what would he do with it? Over time, Jack's injury healed, but the days spent in Ayasha's presence had a more profound effect on him than just physical recovery. The more he learned about her people, the more he realized how little he understood the world around him. Ayasha taught him about the Apache way of life, how they hunted, how they survived in a land that seemed to offer nothing but challenges. She spoke of the spirits that guided them, of the bond they had with the land and each other. And while Jack had spent his life running, fighting, and surviving by his own rules, Ayasha had lived a life of purpose, of connection. Their conversations were slow at first, filled with awkward pauses as Jack tried to understand her teachings. He had never been one for philosophy or spirituality. His world had been black and white: take what you could, keep moving, and don't trust anyone. But Ayasha's quiet strength challenged those ideas. She spoke of the Apache belief in balance, in understanding the world around them, and in living with honor. For the first time in a long time, Jack began to question his own life. Was he living with honor? Was he truly free? Or was he running from something deeper? Despite the language barrier between them, Ayasha and Jack found ways to communicate. She would teach him Apache words and phrases, and he would teach her English in return. Slowly, the two began to understand each other, not just through words, but through actions. Ayasha would show Jack how to track animals, how to move silently through the trees, how to make fire from the most basic materials. In return, Jack shared what he knew: how to handle a gun, how to fight when cornered, how to survive when everything seemed stacked against you. It was an exchange, a give and take, that brought them closer together, even if neither of them fully understood the other's world. But there were times when the silence between them spoke louder than any words could. Jack would catch Ayasha looking at him in a way he didn't quite understand, her dark eyes studying him as if she were reading the lines of his soul. At first, he tried to push the thought away, but he couldn't help but wonder what was going through her mind. What did she see in him? Why had she chosen to save him? Someone who had been nothing but trouble in his life. As the days passed, Jack began to feel something stir inside him, something he had long buried: hope. It was a fragile thing, a flicker in the dark, but it was there. Ayasha had given him the space to heal, both physically and emotionally. She had not judged him for his past. Instead, she had shown him kindness, something he hadn't experienced in years. In a world where betrayal was common and trust was hard to come by, Ayasha's compassion was like a light in the darkness. But not everyone in the village shared Ayasha's compassion for Jack. While some members of the tribe had accepted him with cautious respect, others were more skeptical. The Apache had a strong sense of community, and outsiders, especially outlaws, were not easily accepted. Jack could feel the eyes of the other villagers on him, their stares filled with suspicion and mistrust. They had no reason to believe in him, and Jack understood that. He had lived a life of violence, a life that had hurt many people. The past wasn't something that could be erased, no matter how much he wished it could. One evening, as Jack sat by the fire, watching the flames dance and crackle, Ayasha sat beside him, her presence calm and steady. "You have lived a hard life, Jack," she said, her voice soft but clear. "But here, you can start again. Your past does not have to define you." Jack looked at her, unsure of what to say. He had never been given the chance to start over. He had always thought that redemption was a fantasy, something only people with pure hearts could achieve. But Ayasha's words resonated with him. Maybe it was possible to change, to live a life of meaning instead of just surviving. Maybe he didn't have to run anymore. The next few days were a blur of quiet reflection for Jack. He spent time helping with the chores around the village, gathering firewood, repairing shelters, and learning the ways of the Apache people. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Slowly, Jack began to earn the trust of the villagers, even if it was just a little. He realized that in this place, with these people, he wasn't the feared outlaw anymore. He was simply Jack, a man trying to find his way. It was a humbling experience, one that forced him to confront the man he had been and the man he wanted to become. But no matter how much he tried to change, he knew that his past would always be with him. The bounty hunters were still out there, and Jack knew it was only a matter of time before they came looking for him. His life as an outlaw had a way of catching up with him, no matter how far he ran. He couldn't escape the consequences of his past forever. And yet, for the first time in years, Jack didn't feel like he had to run. He didn't feel the need to escape. He was learning, slowly but surely, that there was something more to life than just surviving. There was something worth fighting for, something that went beyond himself. Ayasha, in her quiet way, had shown him that. And Jack couldn't help but wonder, as the days passed and the bonds between them deepened, if this was where he was meant to be. Could he truly find peace here, among the Apache people? Could he live a life of honor, as Ayasha had taught him, Or was his fate already sealed? As Jack pondered these questions, he knew one thing for sure. The path ahead would not be easy. The dangers of the world were still out there, and his past was never far behind. But for the first time in a long time, Jack Callahan was willing to face the future, no matter what it held. He was no longer just the outlaw. He was beginning to see himself as something more, something better. And it was all because of Ayasha and the tribe that had taken him in. The days in the Apache camp were peaceful. But Jack soon realized that peace, no matter how welcome, could be fragile. It wasn't long before he found that even in a place as serene as this, danger could still be lurking just beyond the horizon. The vast desert surrounding the Apache village was a harsh land, and it wasn't just the unforgiving terrain that threatened their way of life. As much as Jack had come to respect Ayasha and her people, he understood that they weren't immune to the same conflicts and challenges that had shaped his own life. One afternoon, as Jack helped repair a structure made from wooden posts and animal hides, he noticed something strange in the distance. The sun was high, casting a bright light over the valley, but in the heat of the day, the air seemed to shimmer with tension. He squinted, trying to make out the figures on horseback that were slowly making their way toward the camp. The silhouettes were too far off to be sure, but Jack's instincts kicked in. He knew trouble when he saw it. He made his way to the edge of the camp, where Ayasha was speaking with some of the elders. Her expression was calm, but Jack could see the flicker of concern in her eyes as she turned her gaze toward the approaching riders. The elders stood with their hands on their hips, their faces hard as stone. And Jack knew they, too, could feel the weight of the situation. "They're coming," Ayasha said quietly to one of the elders, her voice barely a whisper. Jack stepped closer, still unsure of what was happening, but he could feel the shift in the air. The calm, easy rhythm of life in the village was suddenly replaced by the tension of something unknown. He couldn't help but feel the growing knot in his stomach. "Who are they?" Jack asked, his voice low as he leaned closer to Ayasha. "Settlers," Ayasha replied simply, her eyes narrowing. "They come from the east. They seek to claim this land as their own." Jack's heart sank. He had heard of settlers before, men and women who ventured westward, looking to make their fortune in the wild and untamed land. But he knew that when settlers came, it often meant conflict. The Apache had fought to protect their land and their people for generations, and Jack feared this could be the spark that ignited another war. "They have no right," one of the elders muttered, his voice full of anger. "This land belongs to the Apache." Ayasha's eyes stayed focused on the riders in the distance, her face unreadable. Jack could see the pain in her gaze. The Apache had fought so hard to keep their way of life intact, and yet, every year, there seemed to be new threats from the outside world, always pushing in from the edges of their territory. Jack could sense the tension rising in the village as more and more people gathered, watching the approaching riders. "We cannot let them take what is ours," Ayasha said, her voice firm, as though she were speaking more to herself than anyone else. Jack could feel the weight of her words. It was clear that the Apache were not going to back down from this. He could understand that. He had spent his life fighting for survival, and now he had come to understand what it meant to protect something worth fighting for. But he also knew that his own past made him an outsider here. He was an outlaw, and though he had fought alongside Ayasha and the others in small skirmishes with the wilderness, this was different. The Apache were proud of their heritage, their traditions, and they didn't always trust outsiders, especially someone like Jack. As the riders grew closer, Jack felt a pull within him. He had already seen what Ayasha's people were capable of, how they lived with a deep respect for the land, and yet he couldn't ignore the fear that gnawed at him. Would they see him as one of them now? Or would his past, the life he had led, always be something that would keep him at arm's length? Ayasha must have sensed his hesitation because she turned to him, her eyes soft but resolute. "Will you fight with us, Jack?" she asked. "Will you stand with us?" Jack was silent for a moment, the weight of her question pressing down on him. He had been an outlaw for so long, running from one fight to the next, never staying in one place long enough to form lasting bonds. He had never fought for a cause, never stood for something greater than himself. But Ayasha's question was different. She wasn't asking him to fight for a gold mine or for the riches that most outlaws fought for. She was asking him to stand with her, to protect her people, their way of life. "I will," Jack said, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. "I'll fight with you." Ayasha nodded, her expression softening just a little. It wasn't a smile, but it was enough to let Jack know that, in that moment, she believed in him. It was a feeling he wasn't used to, the trust of another person, especially one like Ayasha, who had given him a chance when no one else would. As the riders drew closer, Jack felt the familiar tension of battle begin to rise in his chest. He had fought many times before, but this was different. He was fighting not for himself, not for survival, but for something he had only just begun to understand: community, honor, and loyalty. The Apache were more than just a people. They were a family, and Jack had been given the chance to be a part of that family. The settlers arrived in a cloud of dust, their horses kicking up the dry earth as they stopped just outside the camp. There were 5 of them, all armed and clearly ready for a confrontation. Jack could feel the unease among the Apache. They were outnumbered, but they were not afraid. Ayasha stepped forward, standing tall, her eyes never leaving the settlers as she spoke. "This land is sacred to our people," she said, her voice strong. "You have no claim here. Leave, before this ends in blood." The leader of the settlers, a tall man with a rough beard, sneered. "This land belongs to anyone who can take it," he spat. "The government's already granted us this territory. You're just a bunch of savages who don't know what to do with it." Jack could see Ayasha's muscles tense, and he knew the fight was coming. There was no negotiating with men like these, greedy, stubborn, and disrespectful. The settlers had come to take what didn't belong to them, and the Apache would defend their home with everything they had. Without another word, the leader of the settlers reached for his gun. But before he could draw it, Ayasha moved like a flash of lightning, pulling an arrow from her quiver and releasing it in one fluid motion. The arrow struck the leader in the chest, sending him tumbling from his horse. The Apache warriors, including Jack, rushed forward, arrows flying, and the battle began. Jack was in the thick of it, his heart pounding in his chest. He fought with a calm he had never known, his movements fluid and instinctive. For the first time in years, he wasn't fighting just to survive, he was fighting for something that mattered, something bigger than himself. The fight didn't last long. The settlers, outmatched and outnumbered, quickly realized that they weren't going to win. They turned their horses and fled, leaving behind their fallen comrades. Jack stood among the Apache, breathing heavily, his eyes scanning the battlefield. The Apache had won, but Jack couldn't help but feel a strange sense of satisfaction. He had fought for something that was worth fighting for. As the dust settled and the village began to return to its peaceful rhythm, Jack found himself standing beside Ayasha once more. She looked at him, her eyes filled with something he couldn't quite understand. "You fought well, Jack," she said simply. He nodded, feeling a sense of pride swell within him. This was the man he had always wanted to be. The man who fought for what was right, who stood by those he cared about. And for the first time in his life, Jack Callahan didn't feel alone. After the battle with the settlers, life in the Apache village slowly returned to its peaceful rhythm. The tension that had hung in the air like a storm cloud had dissipated. But Jack could feel that something had shifted within him. The taste of fighting for something greater than himself, something worth protecting, was still fresh on his lips. For the first time in years, he felt like he had a purpose. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It wasn't about running from his past or hiding from the mistakes he had made. He had stood by the Apache, fought beside them, and in doing so, had found a part of himself he thought he had lost forever. Ayasha noticed the change in Jack too. She had seen him transform from the hardened outlaw who had stumbled into their village, bleeding and weak, to a man who fought with honor, with purpose. She watched him quietly over the days that followed, observing the way he moved through the village, the way he helped the elders, and the way he seemed to grow more connected to the land with each passing day. It was clear to her that Jack was becoming part of their world, part of their family. As much as Jack had been accepted by the tribe, he couldn't shake the feeling that his past would always be a shadow behind him. He had been an outlaw for so long, and though he had proven himself in battle, he couldn't help but wonder if the tribe would ever fully accept him. He had hurt many people in his past, and no matter how much he had changed, he wondered if the scars of his past would always define him. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of pink and orange, Ayesha approached Jack as he sat by the fire. She had seen the way he looked at the world, as if he were waiting for something, perhaps redemption, perhaps forgiveness, or perhaps just a place where he could finally belong. Jack looked up at her as she sat down beside him. Her presence was calm, as it always was, and her eyes, dark and full of understanding, met his. "You are no longer the man you were when you first came here," she said softly. "I can see it in the way you hold yourself, in the way you fight. You are part of our tribe now, Jack. Not just because you fought beside us, but because you've proven you have the strength to change." Her words took Jack by surprise. He had heard many people say similar things before, but coming from Ayesha, they felt different. She had watched him closely, seen the struggle within him, and yet she still saw something in him worth believing in. Jack felt a lump form in his throat, and for the first time in a long time, he felt the weight of his emotions. "Thank you, Ayesha," he replied, his voice rough with gratitude. "But I still don't know if I'm worthy of all this. I've done things, terrible things. I don't know if I can ever make up for them." Ayesha's gaze softened, and she placed a hand on his arm. "We all have a past, Jack. But it's what we do with the present, and how we shape the future, that matters. You have a chance now to build something with us, to create a new story for yourself." Jack looked at her, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew what she was saying. She wasn't just talking about forgiveness or redemption. She was talking about the possibility of a future with her, with the tribe, with a life he never thought he could have. "You're right," Jack said quietly, "but I'm not sure I'm ready for that." Ayesha nodded, understanding the hesitation in his voice. "No one is ever truly ready, Jack. We learn as we go. And sometimes, the best things in life come when we least expect them." The next few days were filled with a quiet sense of anticipation. Jack's bond with the tribe had only grown stronger since the battle with the settlers. He had earned their trust, and more importantly, he had earned his place in their world. It was a world that, at first, had seemed so alien to him, but now it felt more like home than anything else ever had. One evening, as the full moon rose high in the sky, casting a soft, silvery light over the camp, Ayesha approached Jack once again. This time, she was different. There was something new in her eyes, a quiet certainty that Jack couldn't ignore. "I have something to ask you," Ayesha said, her voice steady but full of emotion. "Our people have always had a tradition. When two people are meant to be together, they are chosen by the spirits. And I believe the spirits have chosen you." Jack looked at her, his heart racing. He had been through so much in his life, and now, sitting here in the warmth of the firelight, with the sound of the desert wind around them, he felt as though the entire world had changed. For the first time, he felt like he truly belonged. He was no longer just a man running from his past, no longer just an outlaw. He was someone who had the chance to build a new life, a new future. Ayesha continued, her voice soft and almost a whisper. "Jack, will you be my chosen husband? Will you stand by me, protect me, and be part of our people's future?" The question hung in the air, and Jack could hardly believe what he was hearing. This wasn't just a simple proposal, it was a declaration of trust, of commitment, and of a shared future. It was a request to join her. Not just as a man, but as a partner in every sense of the word. Jack had spent so many years alone, running from one fight to the next. But now, Ayesha was asking him to stand by her side for the rest of their lives. The weight of her words was almost too much to bear. For a long moment, Jack said nothing. He simply looked into Ayesha's eyes, seeing the depth of her sincerity, the strength of her belief in him. And then, Slowly, he reached out and took her hand in his. "Yes," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Yes, Ayasha. I will stand with you. I will be your husband." A soft smile curved Ayasha's lips. And for the first time, Jack saw her truly smile. A smile that lit up her face and made her eyes sparkle in the moonlight. It was a smile that filled him with warmth, with hope, and with a sense of belonging that he had never felt before. The days that followed were filled with preparations for the ceremony, as the tribe came together to celebrate their union. The entire village was involved in the process, creating beautiful decorations, preparing food, and singing songs that had been passed down through generations. It was a time of joy, a time of new beginnings, and Jack could feel the weight of the love and support that surrounded him. He was no longer an outsider. He was part of something much larger than himself. When the day of the ceremony arrived, Jack stood with Ayasha beneath a canopy of leaves, surrounded by the people who had accepted him, who had given him a second chance. The spirits of the land, the ancestors, seemed to watch over them as they made their vows to each other. Jack, who had once lived a life filled with violence and mistrust, now stood with the woman he loved, ready to build a future together. As Ayasha placed a necklace around his neck, symbolizing their bond, Jack realized that he had found the one thing he had been searching for all his life, a place where he truly belonged. It wasn't the land, the gold, or the riches that mattered. It was love, honor, and the people who made life worth living. And in that moment, Jack knew that his past no longer defined him. His future was just beginning, and it was brighter than he had ever dreamed.